Professor Blackwood drew a weathered notebook from his inner pocket, its leather cover darkened by humidity and time, the pagicity and time, the pages within marked with careful sketches and annotations in a precise, scholarly hand. He opened it to a page near the middle, where an intricate drawing depicted the crystal skull surrounded by what appeared to be astronomical charts and mathematical notations that seemed to dance in the flickering firelight like some ancient celestial choreography. "Dr. Ashworth," he began, his finger tracing the delicate lines of her drawings, became convinced that the skull was not merely decorative or ceremonial, but functional. She believed it to be a form of storage, if you will, a repository of knowledge encoded in its crystalline structure. She spent weeks measuring the precise angles of its facets, the mathematical relationships between its proportions. She discovered that when moonlight passed through it at specific angles, the refracted light created patterns on surrounding surfaces, patterns that corresponded to star charts unknown to Western astronomy, but recorded in Maya codices. Holmes leaned forward, his pipe forgotten in the ashtray, eyes fixed upon the notebook with an intensity that transformed his entire bearing. Fascinating. The Maya were exceptional astronomers, their calculations of planetary movements rivaling our own modern precision. "But you said the skull speaks, Professor. Describe this phenomenon more precisely, if you would." The wind outside had shifted, no longer driving rain against the windows, but causing it to fall in shifting curtains. The sound now a softer susurration, almost like distant voices in conversation. I found myself drawn to the skull despite my natural skepticism, watching how the firelight seemed to penetrate its crystalline depths, revealing internal structures, tiny fractures or inclusions that formed patterns almost like neural pathways in a brain. 3 nights before Dr. Ashworth disappeared, the professor continued, his voice taking on a dreamlike quality as memory overtook present moment. We conducted an experiment in my laboratory at the museum. The moon was full. The temperature had dropped to precisely 42 degrees Fahrenheit, and we had positioned the skull upon a black velvet cloth. As moonlight struck its surface through the laboratory window, it began to emit tones, Mr. Holmes. Low, resonant frequencies that seemed to emerge from the crystal itself. Dr. Ashworth recorded them, and when she analyzed the frequencies later, she claimed they formed a mathematical sequence, a progression that appeared in ancient Maya astronomical texts. Holmes rose and moved to the window, pulling aside the curtain to gaze out into the rain-swept street below. A lone figure hurried past, umbrella bent against the wind, their footsteps echoing on wet cobblestones before fading into the general symphony of the storm. And she took these recordings with her when she vanished. Everything, Professor Blackwood confirmed with a heavy sigh. Her notes, her recordings, her translations of the Maya texts. She left only this notebook, which I had borrowed the previous day. When I went to her residence in Bloomsbury, her landlady said she had departed in the early hours, taking a single trunk. She left no forwarding address, no explanation. It was utterly unlike her. Margaret is methodical, rational. She would never simply abandon her work or her commitments without communication. The fire settled with a gentle collapse of embers, and I took the opportunity to add another log, watching sparks spiral upward like tiny orange stars seeking their celestial homes. The new wood caught quickly, fresh flames licking along its surface, filling the room with renewed warmth and the pleasant scent of burning oak. Holmes returned to his chair, retrieving his pipe and relighting it with a glowing taper from the hearth. "Unless," Holmes said softly, smoke curling from his lips like morning mist from a highland log, "she discovered something that compelled immediate action or immediate flight. Professor, you mentioned feeling watched. Describe these observations." Our visitor shifted in his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him, and for the first time I noticed the deep fatigue etched into his features, the weight of worry and sleepless nights. Small things initially, a sense of presence when cataloguing artifacts late in the evening, the feeling of being followed on my walk home through Russell Square. Then, more concrete occurrences. My office was entered, though nothing appeared stolen. Papers were disturbed, rearranged subtly. 2 weeks ago, a gentleman approached me at the museum, claiming to be from the Royal Society, expressing unusual interest in pre-Columbian crystal work. When I inquired at the Society, they had no record of him. "Description?" Holmes asked, his tone sharp now, the detective's mind fully engaged in constructing a framework of facts and implications. Tall, perhaps 40 years of age, well dressed in a manner that suggested continental rather than English tailoring. Dark hair going grey at the temples, a slight accent I could not quite place. Eastern European, perhaps. He had unusual eyes, Mr. Holmes, pale grey, almost colourless, and uncommonly penetrating. He introduced himself as Dr. Victor Constantine, though I suspect that name is as authentic as his credentials from the Royal Society. The mention of false credentials seemed to energize Holmes further. He stood and began to pace, a habit I recognized as essential to his thought process, moving with that peculiar grace that reminded me always of a great cat contemplating its prey. This grows more intriguing by the moment. An impossible artifact, a vanished scholar, mysterious watchers with fabricated identities. "Professor, I shall require access to your laboratory and expedition records first thing tomorrow morning. In the meantime, the skull remains here, where I can examine it properly. You should return to your residence by a circuitous route. Take a cab to Piccadilly, then walk to the Underground, take the Metropolitan line to Baker Street Station, then another cab to your actual destination. If you are indeed being followed, such maneuvers may help us identify your shadows." Professor Blackwood rose somewhat unsteadily, the relief of sharing his burden evident in his posture. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I confess the weight of this mystery has been crushing. To have your assistance brings me considerable comfort." After the professor had departed, following Holmes's instructions for his journey home, my friend and I sat in companionable silence for several long minutes. The only sounds the crackling of the fire, the endless whisper of rain, and the occasional distant rumble of late traffic on Baker Street. Holmes had taken up the crystal skull, turning it slowly in his hands, examining every facet and curve with that microscopic attention he could bring to bear when truly fascinated. "What do you make of it, Watson?" he asked finally, though his eyes never left the object. "Your medical expertise must have observations about the anatomical accuracy of the carving." I leaned forward, studying the skull more carefully. "It is remarkably precise, Holmes. The sutures between the cranial bones, the proportions of the orbital cavities, the angle of the zygomatic arch. Whoever carved this possessed detailed knowledge of human anatomy. Yet, as the professor noted, such precision should be impossible with the tools available to pre-Columbian peoples. Bronze and stone tools could not achieve such fine detail in quartz crystal. Unless, Holmes mused, setting the skull carefully upon the mantelpiece where the firelight could illuminate it. The tools were not pre-Columbian at all, or unless the carving method was something quite different from what we assume. But let us not build castles of speculation upon foundations of insufficient data. Tomorrow we investigate properly. Tonight, old friend, I suggest you retire. You have that lecture at the Royal College of Surgeons at 9, and it would not do to arrive with shadows beneath your eyes. I had indeed forgotten about my morning lecture, and Holmes's reminder of it touched me with that peculiar warmth his rare considerations of my schedule always brought. And you, Holmes, will you sleep, or will you spend the night interrogating our mysterious visitor? He smiled, that slight quirk of lips that indicated genuine amusement. I shall conduct a few basic tests, nothing elaborate. The skull's physical properties interest me, and I wish to verify Professor Blackwood's claims about its acoustic characteristics. But fear not, I shall not summon the entire string section of the London Symphony to test its resonances at midnight. I retired to my room with the sound of Holmes's movements still audible below, the gentle clink of his chemistry apparatus, the soft scrape of his magnifying lens against wood as he positioned it for better examination. Through my window, I could see the rain had finally begun to ease, the clouds breaking to reveal patches of star-strewn sky. Somewhere in London, Dr. Margaret Ashworth was either hiding or held, possessing knowledge that had driven her from her comfortable life into shadow and mystery. Somewhere, too, lurked the enigmatic Dr. Constantine, if that was indeed his name, seeking the crystal skull for purposes unknown. Morning arrived with that peculiar quality of light that follows storm-cleared skies, where every surface seems washed clean and the air itself tastes of renewal. I woke to the smell of Mrs. Hudson's excellent coffee drifting up the stairs, mingling with the fainter scents of bread, toasting and bacon crisping in the pan below. For a moment, in that suspended space between sleep and full wakefulness, I had nearly forgotten the previous night's mysterious visitor. But then, memory returned with the clarity of that rain-washed light streaming through my window. When I descended to our sitting room, I found Holmes already dressed and examining a series of glass plates arranged upon our dining table, each one positioned to catch the morning sun at precise angles. The crystal skull sat at the center of this arrangement, and as sunlight passed through it, patterns of refracted light danced across the plates like some elaborate sundial designed by a mind far more intricate than any I had encountered. "Good morning, Watson," Holmes said, without looking up from his observations, a pencil moving rapidly across a sheet of paper as he sketched the light patterns. "I trust you slept well. Mrs. Hudson has prepared breakfast, though I confess I have been too absorbed to partake." The professor was quite correct about the optical properties of this remarkable object. The internal structure of the crystal creates specific diffraction patterns that change with the angle of incident light. Most intriguing. I poured myself coffee from the pot Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully left, warming by the fire, the rich aroma helping to fully banish the lingering cobwebs of sleep. "Have you slept at all, Holmes?" "An hour, perhaps 2. The mind was too engaged for proper rest. But no matter. I have made several useful discoveries. First, the crystal is indeed quartz, but of a purity rarely encountered in natural formations. Second, there are microscopic inclusions within the structure, forming patterns that appear deliberate rather than random. And third, when I reproduced the temperature conditions the professor described and used a tuning fork to introduce vibrations, the skull did indeed produce tones, harmonics, that suggest it may function as a kind of resonating chamber. He finally looked up, and I was relieved to see that despite his night of minimal sleep, his eyes held that bright clarity that indicated engagement rather than exhaustion. Eat something, Watson. We depart for the British Museum within the hour, and I suspect we shall have little time for leisure once our investigation begins in earnest. The breakfast was excellent, as Mrs. Hudson's cooking invariably proved to be, and we ate in comfortable silence while Holmes continued to make notations in his commonplace book, occasionally glancing at the skull as though it might suddenly reveal all its secrets through sheer force of his observation. Through the window, I could see Baker Street coming to life with its usual morning rhythms. Delivery carts making their rounds, businessmen striding purposefully toward their offices, a flower girl arranging her wares on the corner. The British Museum stood magnificent in the morning light, its great columns rising like ancient sentinels, guarding the accumulated knowledge of civilizations. Professor Blackwood met us at the staff entrance, looking somewhat more rested than he had the previous evening, though anxiety still creased his brow. He led us through corridors that grew progressively narrower and more labyrinthine as we descended into the museum's working heart, past offices where scholars bent over manuscripts and artifacts, until finally we arrived at a heavy oak door bearing a brass plate that read Pre-Columbian Studies. The professor's laboratory proved to be a spacious room lined with shelves holding carefully catalogued artifacts, each labelled with meticulous precision. Large tables dominated the centre, currently covered with photographs, maps, and drawings from the Guatemalan expedition. The morning light filtered through high windows, falling across a particular table where I could see the black velvet cloth Professor Blackwood had mentioned, still positioned as it had been during his experiments with Dr. Ashworth. "Everything is precisely as Margaret left it," the professor said softly, gesturing around the room with something approaching reverence. "I have not disturbed her workspace. Perhaps you might find something I have missed, Mr. Holmes. Some clue to her sudden departure." Holmes moved through the space with the systematic precision of a bloodhound on a scent, examining not just the obvious materials, but the room itself. He studied the windows, checked the locks, ran his fingers along shelves and under table edges. I watched him work, familiar enough with his methods to know that interruption would be unwelcome. Instead, I occupied myself examining the photographs from the expedition, remarkable images showing the temple complex emerging from jungle growth, the sealed chamber door carved with intricate glyphs, and finally, the moment of discovery, the crystal skull resting upon a stone altar, in a room that had not known human presence for a millennium. "Watson, come here a moment," Holmes called from the far corner of the laboratory. I found him kneeling beside a small wastebasket, using tweezers to extract what appeared to be torn fragments of paper. "Professor Blackwood, does Dr. Ashworth typically destroy her notes?" "Never," the professor replied with certainty. "She is methodical about documentation. Every observation, every measurement is recorded and preserved." Holmes laid the fragments upon a nearby table, beginning the painstaking process of reconstruction like a puzzle solver working with pieces of sky. As he worked, I noticed his expression growing increasingly focused, that tightness around his eyes that indicated significant discovery. After perhaps 20 minutes of careful arrangement, a partial page emerged, covered in Dr. Ashworth's neat handwriting. Much was illegible, torn beyond reconstruction, but certain phrases remained clear. The sequence corresponds: astronomical event, convergence on December 15th, must not allow, dangerous in wrong hands, the Brotherhood knows. Holmes read aloud, his voice trailing off as he studied the fragmentary text. Professor, what significance might December 15th hold? That is less than 6 weeks hence. Professor Blackwood moved to a wall calendar, his finger tracing across dates marked with various astronomical notations. The winter solstice approaches on December 21st, but the 15th. Let me check my ephemeris. He retrieved a thick astronomical reference book from his shelf, pages rustling as he searched for the relevant dates. Ah, December 15th marks a rare conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, visible in the pre-dawn sky. Such conjunctions occur roughly every 20 years. But this particular alignment, yes, here it is. This alignment matches historical records of a conjunction that occurred in Mayan territories approximately 1,000 years ago. Give or take a decade based on our calendar conversions. The room seemed to grow quieter, as though the very air held its breath. Outside, the sounds of London continued unabated, but within these walls, surrounded by artifacts of vanished peoples and mysterious purposes, time itself seemed to bend and flex like light through crystal. The Brotherhood, Holmes mused, returning his attention to the torn note. Dr. Ashworth felt threatened by some organization, threatened enough to destroy her notes and flee. Yet she left these fragments, perhaps hoping they would be found by someone who could interpret them. Professor, during your expedition or since your return, have you encountered any reference to a brotherhood, any organization interested in pre-Columbian artifacts beyond normal academic channels? The professor's face had gone pale, and he sank slowly into a chair, one hand pressed against his chest as though steadying his heart. There were stories in Guatemala, whispers among the local Maya people. They spoke of the Cofradia de la Calavera, the Brotherhood of the Skull. According to legend, they are guardians of ancient knowledge, protectors of secrets that predate even the great Maya cities. But I dismissed such tales as local folklore, the sort of mystical embellishment that always surrounds archaeological discoveries. Holmes began photographing the torn note fragments with the professor's camera, adjusting the apparatus with practiced efficiency. The click and flash of the exposure seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed laboratory. In my experience, Professor, folklore often contains kernels of truth wrapped in layers of cultural interpretation. If this brotherhood is real and believes the crystal skull holds knowledge they wish to protect, or perhaps to exploit, then Dr. Ashworth may have fled not from academic competition, but from genuine danger. A sudden sound from the corridor outside made us all start, a door closing somewhere in the museum's depths, followed by footsteps approaching with measured cadence. Professor Blackwood moved quickly to his laboratory door, opening it to reveal a museum guard making his rounds. After a brief exchange, confirming all was well, the professor closed the door again, but the interruption had broken the spell of our discoveries. I suggest, Holmes said, carefully gathering the note fragments into an envelope, that we remove Dr. Ashworth's materials to Baker Street for more thorough examination. Professor, can this be arranged without attracting undue attention? If we are indeed dealing with watchers, it would be wise to conduct our investigation with discretion. As the professor began carefully packing documents and photographs into a leather satchel, I found myself studying the expedition images again, particularly those showing the sealed chamber. Something about the glyphs carved around the doorway drew my eye, their flowing forms seeming to shift in the changing light as clouds passed overhead outside the high windows. In one photograph, taken with flash powder, the glyphs cast shadows that formed patterns different from their surface appearance, as though the carvers had created two messages, one visible, one hidden in negative space. "Holmes," I said quietly, holding the photograph so he could examine it. "Look at the shadows here. Do you see it?" His intake of breath was sharp, sudden. "Remarkable, Watson. Quite remarkable." The Maya were masters of light and shadow, incorporating astronomical observations into their architecture. But this suggests they applied similar principles to more portable objects as well. "Professor, we must take these photographs with us. I believe Dr. Ashworth discovered something in these images, something that sent her into hiding or into action." The winter sun was climbing higher now, filling the laboratory with that clear, pale light peculiar to November mornings in London. And somewhere in the great museum above us, visitors wandered among Egyptian sarcophagi and Greek marbles, unaware that in these lower chambers a mystery was unfolding that reached across oceans and centuries, connecting ancient Maya astronomers to Victorian scholars, cosmic alignments to crystalline secrets, all orbiting around a small carved skull that waited patiently in our Baker Street rooms to reveal what truths it held locked within its flawless, silent depths, crafting unique script continuation with distinct pacing elements. The hansom cab that carried us back to Baker Street moved through London's afternoon traffic with the unhurried rhythm of a ship navigating familiar waters, the horse's hooves creating a steady percussion against cobblestones still damp from the previous night's rain. Holmes sat opposite me, the leather satchel containing Dr. Ashworth's materials resting upon his knees, his fingers drumming an unconscious pattern against its surface, while his eyes tracked the passing streetscape with that peculiar quality of seeing without appearing to look. The professor had remained at the museum, citing afternoon appointments he could not cancel without arousing suspicion, though I sensed his relief at sharing the burden of investigation with minds trained in the unraveling of mysteries. We had said little since departing the museum, both absorbed in our own contemplations of what we had discovered. The torn note fragments troubled me deeply. There was something in Dr. Ashworth's hurried words, the desperate quality implied by the destruction of her careful records, that spoke of fear rather than mere academic caution. I found myself constructing narratives in my mind, scenarios of midnight visitors and whispered threats, though I knew Holmes would dismiss such speculation as premature. The cab turned onto Baker Street just as the afternoon sun broke fully through the thinning clouds, sending shafts of golden light down between the buildings, like celestial spotlights illuminating a stage. Our sitting room, when we ascended to it, had transformed in our absence from the morning's experimental laboratory into something approaching its normal, comfortable disorder. Mrs. Hudson had tidied during our absence, the breakfast dishes cleared, the crystal skull now resting upon the mantelpiece, where it caught the afternoon light and scattered it in prismatic fragments across our Persian carpet. Holmes immediately cleared our dining table, spreading Dr. Ashworth's photographs in careful arrangement, while I prepared tea from the pot Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully left warming. The domestic ritual of measuring leaves and pouring water provided a soothing counterpoint to the extraordinary nature of our investigation, grounding the mysterious in the mundane comfort of afternoon tea. I brought Holmes his cup, knowing he would forget it if I did not place it directly within his reach, and settled into my chair with my own, content for the moment to observe his process. "The photographs tell a story," Holmes murmured, more to himself than to me, "if one knows how to read them. See here, Watson, this image of the temple entrance. The glyphs are arranged in a specific sequence, reading from top to bottom, left to right. But look at the shadow patterns created by the photographer's flash powder. They form a secondary sequence, a hidden message visible only when light strikes from precisely this angle." I leaned forward, studying the image more carefully. Indeed, the shadows did seem to form shapes, though whether they constituted deliberate communication or mere coincidence of light and stone, I could not say with certainty. Holmes, however, had no such doubts. He retrieved a notebook and began sketching the shadow patterns, his pencil moving with swift precision across the page. "The Maya," he continued, his voice taking on that lecturing quality he adopted when explaining his deductions, incorporated dualities into much of their cosmology. Light and shadow, day and night, life and death. It follows that they might encode knowledge in such paired forms, the visible and the hidden existing simultaneously, each incomplete without the other. Dr. Ashworth recognized this. See her notations on the back of this photograph. She has drawn these same shadow patterns and added question marks, indicating uncertainty about their meaning, but certainty about their significance. The tea grew cool in my cup as I watched Holmes work, his mind moving through the evidence with the methodical precision of a master chess player contemplating a complex endgame. Outside our window, Baker Street pursued its afternoon business, a barrel organ playing somewhere nearby, children's voices raised in play, the ordinary sounds of London life continuing in blissful ignorance of pre-Columbian mysteries and vanished scholars. A sharp crack from the fireplace startled us both, a log splitting as the flames consumed its heart, sending a small shower of sparks against the screen. The sudden sound seemed to break Holmes's concentration, and he straightened, pressing his hands against the small of his back in a gesture of physical relief. "I have been bent over these images too long. Watson, would you do me the service of examining the expedition journal?" The professor included it in his materials. Fresh eyes may catch details I have missed. The journal proved to be a substantial volume bound in weathered leather, its pages filled with daily observations, recorded in Professor Blackwood's precise hand. I turned to the entries describing the discovery of the sealed chamber, finding detailed accounts of the excavation process, measurements of the chamber's dimensions, and careful copies of the glyphs surrounding the entrance. But it was a marginal notation, almost overlooked in the wealth of technical detail that caught my attention. "Holmes," I said, reading the passage aloud, "listen to this entry from 3 days after they opened the chamber. Dr. Ashworth insists we work only during daylight hours within the temple. She has forbidden any nighttime investigations, claiming the local workers grow agitated after sunset, speaking of voices in the darkness. I have heard nothing myself, but her caution seems prudent, given the isolation of our location and our dependence upon local cooperation. Holmes crossed the room in 3 swift strides, taking the journal from my hands to read the passage himself. "Voices in the darkness," he repeated softly. "How very curious." And here, 3 days later, M.A. has become increasingly withdrawn, spending hours alone in the sealed chamber with the skull. When questioned, she speaks of patterns, sequences, messages spanning centuries. I grow concerned for her mental state, though her academic work remains impeccable. Professor Blackwood did not share these concerns with us. Perhaps he felt them too personal, I suggested, or feared they might prejudice your investigation. Scholars can be protective of their colleagues' reputations. Indeed. Holmes returned to the table, but instead of resuming his study of the photographs, he moved to the window, gazing out at the lengthening shadows as afternoon began its slow transition toward evening. Yet these observations paint a picture of a woman who discovered something in that sealed chamber, something that affected her profoundly. Not madness, Watson, despite the professor's concerns. No, I suspect Dr. Ashworth experienced what we might call a revelation, an understanding that transformed her perception of the skull's significance. The December 15th date troubles me, I admitted. If Dr. Ashworth believed this astronomical conjunction held significance, if she felt the skull must not fall into the wrong hands before that date, then she may have taken it upon herself to act as guardian. But where would she go? How does one hide with an artifact of such obvious value and interest? Holmes turned from the window, and I saw in his expression that particular intensity that indicated his mind had seized upon something significant. She would go somewhere the artifact itself directed her, Watson. Think about it. She spent weeks studying the skull, measuring its properties, analyzing the patterns of light and sound it produced. If it truly contains encoded knowledge, astronomical data aligned with specific conjunctions, then that data might include locational information, coordinates, perhaps, or references to sacred sites aligned with celestial events. He strode to the mantelpiece and retrieved the crystal skull, holding it up to catch the slanting afternoon light. The Maya built their cities and temples in precise relationship to astronomical observations. Chichen Itza, for instance, is positioned so that during equinoxes, sunlight creates the illusion of a serpent descending the pyramid steps. If this skull was created to store knowledge related to a specific conjunction occurring on December 15th, then it may have been designed to reveal that knowledge only when positioned in a specific location under specific conditions. The possibility was both thrilling and troubling. If Holmes was correct, then Dr. Ashworth had embarked upon a journey to some location indicated by the skull itself, perhaps hoping to unlock its secrets before the conjunction, or to protect it from those who might misuse such knowledge. But what knowledge could an ancient artifact hold that remained relevant or dangerous after 1,000 years? As if reading my thoughts, Holmes set the skull back upon the mantelpiece and turned to face me fully. You wonder what secrets could justify such drama, such flight and fear. Consider, Watson, what the Maya knew that we are only now rediscovering. They calculated the solar year to within seconds of our modern measurements. They predicted eclipses centuries in advance. They understood mathematical concepts, including zero, long before Europe adopted them. What if this skull contains not mystical wisdom, but scientific knowledge, observations and calculations that might advance our understanding of astronomy, mathematics, or physics by decades or more. The sitting room had grown dim as we talked, the afternoon light fading toward that peculiar twilight hour when gas lamps must be lit, but the sun has not quite relinquished its hold upon the sky. I rose to attend to the lamps, their warm glow gradually pushing back the encroaching shadows, while Holmes returned to his study of the photographs with renewed vigour. As though our conversation had crystallized some theory he now sought to prove through evidence. "There," he said suddenly, pointing to one particular image. "And here, and again here. Do you see it, Watson? These glyphs appear repeatedly throughout the chamber, always in groups of 3, always oriented toward specific compass points. They are not random decoration, but a form of notation, markers indicating direction or relationship. If we could translate them, they might provide the very coordinates Dr. Ashworth sought." Mrs. Hudson's knock upon our door preceded her entrance by mere seconds, and she bore a telegram upon her silver tray, extending it to Holmes with the patient resignation of one long accustomed to the irregular hours and mysterious communications that characterized our household. Holmes tore it open, his eyes scanning the brief message with increasing focus, and when he looked up, his expression held equal parts satisfaction and concern. "From Professor Blackwood," he announced, passing me the telegram. "Dr. Victor Constantine visited the museum this afternoon, requesting access to the pre-Columbian department. The professor denied him, citing security protocols. But our mysterious continental gentleman was most insistent, suggesting he possessed authorization from certain unnamed parties. Most interesting of all, he mentioned specifically his interest in crystal artifacts and December astronomical events. The shadows in our sitting room seemed to deepen despite the gas lamp's glow, and outside our window, the last light of day painted the London sky in shades of amber and violet, heralding the approach of night, and all the mysteries and dangers darkness might conceal within its patient, watching depths. Commencing Sherlock Holmes' Crystal Skull narrative composition, twilight had surrendered fully to evening by the time Holmes finished composing his reply to Professor Blackwood, the nib of his pen scratching across paper with that distinctive sound of ink meeting fibre, each stroke deliberate and measured. I watched him seal the envelope and ring for Mrs. Hudson, who appeared with her customary promptness to dispatch the message via street urchin to the museum before its closure for the night. The crystal skull seemed to absorb the lamplight rather than reflect it now, its depths darkening to something approaching opacity, as though it too recognized the transition from day to night and adjusted its properties accordingly. "We must assume," Holmes said, settling back into his chair with his pipe freshly filled, "that Dr. Constantine and his associates, whoever they may be, are several steps ahead of us in this investigation. They knew of the skull's discovery before the professor brought it to London. They have resources sufficient to fabricate credentials and surveil the museum, and they appear to possess knowledge of the December 15th conjunction's significance. This suggests either inside information from the original expedition or access to scholarly resources we have not yet identified." I pulled my chair closer to the fire, feeling the evening's chill despite the room's warmth. November in London carried a particular dampness that seemed to seep through walls and windows, settling into bones and spirit alike. Could there be another scholar involved? someone who studied the temple complex before the professor's expedition, local authorities in Guatemala who documented the site. Possible, though the professor indicated the temple was unknown to official archaeological records. However, unknown to official channels does not mean unknown entirely. The local Maya people clearly knew of its existence, referred to it by name. Folk memory can be remarkably persistent, Watson, passing knowledge through generations in forms we might dismiss as mere legend. He paused to relight his pipe, the match flare casting sudden shadows across his angular features. There is another possibility, one more troubling. Dr. Ashworth herself may have communicated her findings to parties unknown, either before recognizing the danger or under some form of coercion we cannot yet comprehend. The fire crackled its agreement, a log-shifting position with a shower of sparks that momentarily illuminated the brass fender. Outside, the street sounds had changed with evening's arrival, the business traffic replaced by the softer rhythms of residents returning to their homes, the occasional laughter from the public house on the corner, a distant church bell marking the hour with 6 measured chimes. Holmes rose and moved to the table where Dr. Ashworth's photographs still lay arranged in their careful pattern. He selected several showing the temple chamber's interior walls, bringing them closer to the lamp for detailed examination. The glyphs that repeat in groups of 3, he murmured, more to himself than to me. They appear to use a numerical notation system. The Maya employed both vigesimal mathematics, base 20 counting, and bar and dot numerals for their calculations. If I am correct about these markings being locational indicators. He trailed off, reaching for a sheet of paper and beginning to transcribe the symbols with meticulous accuracy. I recognized this phase of his investigation when he became so absorbed in analysis that the external world faded to insignificance, his entire being focused upon the puzzle before him. I contented myself with my own examination of the expedition journal, turning to entries that described the local legends Professor Blackwood had recorded during his time in Guatemala. The Maya people who lived near the excavation site, according to these accounts, believed the temple had been built by star watchers, astronomers who could speak with the sky and receive messages from the celestial realms. They claimed the crystal skull was not carved by human hands, but had fallen from the heavens during a great cosmic alignment, a gift from the gods containing knowledge of past and future, of cycles that governed not just earthly seasons, but the rise and fall of civilizations themselves. A sharp knock at our door interrupted my reading, and I glanced at the clock to find it had gone 7, rather later than our usual callers ventured. Holmes looked up from his transcriptions, his expression alert, and called for entry. Mrs. Hudson appeared, her face troubled, carrying not a calling card, but what appeared to be a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and bound with twine. "This arrived by special messenger, Mr. Holmes," she said, setting the package upon the table with evident relief at being rid of it. A foreign gentleman, he was, insisted I bring it up immediately, and said you would understand the urgency. He wouldn't give his name, just handed me this, and departed in rather a rush. Holmes examined the package without touching it, his eyes narrowing as he studied the knots in the twine, the quality of the paper, the manner of wrapping. "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Please describe this messenger in detail." Our landlady's description matched what we already knew of Dr. Victor Constantine. Tall, continental bearing, grey-streaked dark hair, pale grey eyes. She added that his English was excellent, but carried traces of an accent she thought might be Russian or perhaps Czech, and that he wore an expensive overcoat with distinctive silver buttons, bearing some sort of crest or emblem she could not clearly see. After she departed, Holmes carefully cut the twine and unwrapped the package, revealing a wooden box of dark mahogany, its surface carved with intricate patterns that seemed to echo the Maya glyphs we had been studying. Inside, nestled in black velvet, lay a small crystal fragment, no larger than a walnut, but unmistakably of the same material and craftsmanship as the skull upon our mantelpiece. Beneath the fragment rested a folded note, written in an elegant, educated hand. Holmes read the note aloud, his voice steady, despite the message's disturbing content. "Gentlemen, you possess something that does not belong to you. The skull is sacred property, protected by oaths older than your empire. We offer exchange. Return the artifact before the conjunction, and Dr. Ashworth will be returned unharmed. Continue your investigation, and you condemn her to consequences you cannot imagine." This fragment proves we possess the sister skull, equally powerful, equally dangerous in knowledgeable hands. You have until December 10th to decide. Instructions for the exchange will follow. The Brotherhood remembers, the Brotherhood endures, the Brotherhood protects. The sitting room seemed to contract around us, the shadows pressing closer despite the lamplight, and I felt my hand unconsciously move to where my service revolver rested in my desk drawer. They have her then. Dr. Ashworth is their prisoner. Or their hostage, at minimum, Holmes agreed, though his attention remained fixed upon the crystal fragment. Interesting that they mention a sister skull. Pre-Columbian cultures often created objects in pairs, mirrors of each other, representing cosmic dualities. If such a second skull exists... He held the fragment up to the light, and it sparkled with the same prismatic quality as the larger artifact, though the patterns it created were subtly different, complementary rather than identical. I found myself standing, unable to remain seated in the face of such a revelation. Surely we must inform Scotland Yard, Holmes. This is a kidnapping, possibly an international crime. Lestrade should be involved. And tell them what, precisely? That a missing scholar may be held by a mysterious brotherhood protecting pre-Columbian artifacts connected to astronomical conjunctions. That we have received an untraceable message from parties unknown demanding we surrender museum property. No, Watson, official channels would only complicate matters and potentially endanger Dr. Ashworth further. We must approach this with subtlety and intelligence. He set the fragment carefully beside the skull on the mantelpiece, and I noticed immediately how the two pieces seemed to respond to each other's proximity. The light patterns they created beginning to interact, to weave together into something more complex than either produced alone. Holmes noticed it too, his breath catching slightly as he observed the phenomenon. "Remarkable," he whispered. "They are indeed paired, designed to function in concert. Separately, they are extraordinary but incomplete. Together..." He moved the fragment incrementally closer to the skull, and the light patterns intensified, began to pulse with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, almost like communication. The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly, enough that I saw my breath mist slightly in the lamplight, and both Holmes and I turned toward the fireplace, expecting to find it had died down. But the fire burned bright as ever, the drop in temperature emanating not from any natural source, but from the two crystal artifacts themselves, as though they were drawing heat from the surrounding air to fuel whatever strange process their proximity had activated. "Holmes," I said quietly, "perhaps we should separate them. This seems unwise." He nodded slowly, using a pencil to push the fragment back to the far end of the mantelpiece, and immediately the temperature normalized. The pulsing patterns faded to their previous separate states. "Agreed. Whatever properties these objects possess, we are not yet prepared to activate them fully. But we have learned something valuable. The Brotherhood's claim about the sister skull appears genuine, and if they possess one while we hold the other, then neither party can fully utilize whatever power or knowledge these artifacts contain." I returned to my chair, my mind racing through the implications of this strange evening's developments. Dr. Ashworth was alive but captive, held by people who apparently took ancient prophecies and cosmic alignments with deadly seriousness. We had less than 4 weeks to either rescue her through investigation or surrender the skull in exchange for her safety. And hovering over all of it was the approaching date of December 15th, when some astronomical event would occur that these mysterious Brotherhood members believed held tremendous significance. "We need more information about this organization," I said. "The Brotherhood of the Skull, if that is indeed what they call themselves. Surely such a group would leave traces in historical records, academic papers, perhaps police files, if they have engaged in previous activities of this nature." Holmes nodded, already moving toward his indexed files. That remarkable collection of newspaper clippings, official reports, and personal observations he had accumulated over years of practice. "I shall search my records for any mention of secret societies connected to pre-Columbian artifacts. You, Watson, might examine your British Medical Journal collection. Dr. Ashworth is a scholar of some repute. There may be published papers, presentations to learned societies, biographical information that could provide insight into her movements or associations." As we settled into our research, the night deepened outside our windows, London's vast machinery of life and commerce gradually quieting towards sleep, while within our warm room 2 men pursued knowledge through documents and deduction, racing against calendar and conspiracy to unravel a mystery that stretched from ancient Maya temples to modern metropolitan streets, from star-filled Guatemalan skies to the fog-wrapped corners of empire, all orbiting around 2 small crystal skulls that waited with the infinite patience of stone to reveal whether we possessed the wisdom to unlock their secrets, or merely the hubris to believe we should try. Crafting script with narrative shift, the hours stretched deep in. The hours stretched deep into the night, measured not by the clock, but by the gradual accumulation of discarded papers, empty teacups, and the slow consumption of our coal supply, as the fire demanded periodic feeding. Holmes worked with that tireless intensity I had witnessed countless times, his fingers moving through his vast collection of indexed materials, with the precision of a concert pianist navigating familiar keys, pulling files and folders, scanning contents, making occasional notations in his commonplace book. I immersed myself in back issues of various journals, searching for any mention of Dr. Margaret Ashworth beyond her academic credentials, hoping to find some connection, some thread that might lead us toward understanding her predicament. The city beyond our windows had descended into that particular stillness that comes in the small hours, when even London's ceaseless energy finds momentary pause, when the rumble of late traffic fades and the early morning deliveries have not yet begun. Only the occasional footstep of a constable on his rounds, or the distant whistle of a night watchman, disturbed the quiet, sounds that seemed to emphasize rather than break the pervading hush. The gaslights in the street below created pools of amber illumination in the darkness, and I found my eyes drawn periodically to the window, half expecting to see shadowy figures watching our residence, agents of the mysterious brotherhood, keeping surveillance on their demanded prize. "Watson," Holmes said suddenly, breaking a silence that had lasted perhaps half an hour, "I have found something that may prove significant. Come look at this." I crossed to where he sat, surrounded by newspaper clippings and official reports, and he indicated a yellowed cutting from the Times dated some 15 years prior. The article described a theft from the British Museum, specifically from the pre-Columbian collection, though the item stolen was never publicly identified. What caught Holmes's attention was a marginal note in his own hand. "Museum denies political motivation. Privately suggests artifacts' return was negotiated through unofficial channels. Inspector Gregson's investigation closed without charges filed." "I remember this case peripherally," Holmes explained, his finger tracing the lines of text. "I was consulted briefly, but the museum withdrew its cooperation almost immediately, claiming internal resolution. At the time, I thought it merely institutional embarrassment over security failures. But now, in light of our current situation, I wonder if this represented an earlier encounter with our brotherhood." He pulled another file, this one containing correspondence between various academic institutions regarding pre-Columbian research protocols. Buried within the mundane bureaucratic exchanges was a letter from the Royal Anthropological Society expressing concern about amateur enthusiasts interfering with proper scientific investigation of Central American sites, and recommending that major discoveries be reported through official channels to prevent unfortunate misunderstandings with local protective organizations. "Protective organizations," I repeated, a diplomatic phrasing for what might be secret societies claiming guardianship over cultural heritage. "Precisely." Holmes leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin in that characteristic gesture of deep contemplation. "What we are dealing with may not be simple thieves or fanatics, but rather an organization that views itself as legitimate protector of pre-Columbian knowledge, operating across generations with resources and reach that span continents. They have operated quietly, preferring negotiation to violence, returning to the shadows after each intervention, until now." The fire had burned low, and I took the opportunity to add fresh coal, the metallic scrape of the scuttle against the fender seeming unnaturally loud in the night stillness. New flames licked tentatively at the added fuel before catching properly, sending fresh warmth radiating into our sitting room. The crystal skull on the mantelpiece caught the renewed firelight, and for just a moment I thought I saw something moving within its depths, patterns shifting like thoughts through a crystalline mind, before dismissing it as mere trick of flame and shadow. "Have you found anything in your medical journals?" Holmes asked, and I returned to my chair with the slight stiffness that comes from sitting too long in one position. "Several articles by Dr. Ashworth on pre-Columbian medical practices and astronomical knowledge," I reported, retrieving the relevant issues I had set aside. She appears to have specialized in the intersection of Maya astronomy and their approach to healing, arguing that their medical practitioners used astronomical observations to time treatments and predict illness patterns. One article from 2 years ago suggests she believed Maya astronomers possessed knowledge of cosmic cycles that modern science has yet to rediscover. Holmes extended his hand for the journals, and I passed them across. He read with that phenomenal speed that allowed him to extract essential information while discarding irrelevant detail, his eyes moving across pages with mechanical efficiency. When he reached the third article, however, his pace slowed, and he read certain passages twice before looking up with an expression of dawning realization. Listen to this, Watson. This is from a presentation she gave to the Royal Society 18 months ago. The ancient Maya understood that celestial movements were not merely predictive of earthly events, but could influence physical phenomena through what we might call resonance or harmonic alignment. Their crystal artifacts may have served as focusing mechanisms for these cosmic influences, allowing skilled practitioners to access knowledge or energies during specific astronomical configurations. While modern science dismisses such concepts as primitive mysticism, recent discoveries in physics regarding electromagnetic waves and crystal properties suggest we may need to reconsider these ancient technologies with less prejudice and more rigorous investigation. He set the journal down, his expression thoughtful. She was arguing, quite courageously given academic conservatism, that Maya crystal artifacts might function according to principles we are only beginning to understand through modern physics. Small wonder she became fascinated by a skull of such extraordinary craftsmanship. It represented potential proof of her theories. A sound from the street below drew my attention to the window, and I rose to investigate, peering carefully around the curtain's edge. A hansom cab had stopped several doors down, and I watched as a figure emerged, tall and wrapped in a dark overcoat despite the hour's lateness. The figure paused beneath a street lamp, looking up toward our windows with what seemed deliberate intent, then walked slowly past our door without stopping, continuing to the corner before disappearing around it. "Holmes," I said quietly. We had an observer, tall gentleman, dark coat, just walked past after studying our windows. He is gone now, but he was definitely watching. As I expected, the Brotherhood will want to ensure we do not attempt to flee with the skull or contact authorities. They are patient, Watson, but vigilant. It confirms something important, however. They need us to surrender the skull voluntarily, or at least cooperatively. If they merely wanted to steal it, they could have attempted such an action already. No, they require something more, perhaps a formal transfer during the conjunction, some ritual or protocol that matters to their purposes. He rose and moved to the mantelpiece, studying the skull with renewed intensity. The question becomes, what happens during the December 15th conjunction that makes these artifacts so crucial? Is it merely symbolic significance, or do they genuinely believe something will occur? Some activation of properties that requires both skulls present at a specific location. I consulted the expedition journal again, searching for any mention of dual skulls or paired artifacts. Near the end of the professor's entries, I found a passage describing a conversation with one of the elderly Maya men who had guided them to the temple site. The old man had spoken of the twins who sing to the stars, crystal guardians placed in sacred locations by ancient astronomer priests to maintain balance between earth and sky. According to the legend, when cosmic harmony required restoration, the twins would call to each other across distances, drawing those who could hear their song to bring them together under the aligned stars. "Holmes, this may be relevant," I said, reading him the passage. "The local legends speak of paired skulls designed to be reunited during specific celestial events. Perhaps what the Brotherhood protects is not merely the artifacts themselves, but the knowledge of when and where such reunions should occur." And Dr. Ashworth, having studied the skull intensively, may have deciphered instructions encoded in its structure. Holmes continued the thought. She discovered not just that the skulls should be reunited on December 15th, but where this reunion must take place. That knowledge prompted her to flee with her research, hoping either to reach that location herself or to prevent the Brotherhood from completing whatever they believe this conjunction will achieve. The clock struck 3, its chimes seeming to float through the quiet room like gentle reminders of time's inexorable passage. We had perhaps 37 days until the conjunction, less than 5 weeks to locate Dr. Ashworth, understand the true nature of the crystal skulls, and decide what role, if any, we should play in this ancient drama unfolding through modern London streets. Holmes began pacing, that sure sign his mind was assembling disparate facts into coherent theory. The Brotherhood's message gave us until December 10th to decide about the exchange. That allows them 5 days before the conjunction to complete whatever preparations they require. But why give us so much time? Why not to demand immediate surrender? Perhaps, I ventured, they need time as well. Time to transport the artifacts to wherever this reunion must occur. Time to perform rituals or preparations. Or possibly, they hope to use the interval to negotiate rather than threaten, to convince us through reason rather than force. Or they are confident we cannot locate Dr. Ashworth before their deadline, making their threat of consequences academic. Holmes stopped his pacing at the window, looking out at the dark street. But they underestimate several factors. They do not know that Dr. Ashworth left clues in her haste to flee. They do not know we possess expedition photographs that may contain locational information. And they cannot know the extent of resources available to us through our own networks of informants and specialists. He turned back to face me, and despite the late hour, his eyes held no trace of fatigue, only that burning intensity that made him, in such moments, seem less human and more like some finely calibrated instrument designed for singular purpose. Tomorrow, Watson, we call upon our resources. I shall telegraph my contacts in the archaeological community, inquire about pre-Columbian sites in Britain that might hold significance for such a conjunction. You will visit the Admiralty archives and research astronomical observatories that might have been of interest to Dr. Ashworth. If she intended to position the skull for observation during the conjunction, she would need a location with clear celestial views and possible historical significance. The wisdom in his plan was evident, though my body protested the thought of beginning such investigations after so little sleep. Yet Holmes seemed to require no rest, his mind racing ahead through possibilities and probabilities, constructing chains of inference from the scattered evidence we had assembled through the long night's research. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps on the stairs surprised us both, and she appeared bearing a tray with fresh tea and warm scones, despite the unconscionable hour. "Thought you gentlemen might need sustenance," she said, with the weary resignation of one long accustomed to irregular schedules. "And there is a young person at the door asking for Mr. Holmes. Says it is urgent, but will give no name." Shall I send them away at this hour?" Holmes and I exchanged glances, and he nodded to Mrs. Hudson. "Please show them up. Urgency at 3 in the morning deserves at least a hearing." Our visitor proved to be a young woman, perhaps 25 years of age, dressed in a travelling coat with mud splashed upon its hem, her hair somewhat dishevelled, her face showing the strain of exhaustion and anxiety. But her eyes, when she looked at Holmes, held fierce intelligence and determination that immediately commanded respect. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice steady despite obvious fatigue, "my name is Catherine Winters. I was Dr. Margaret Ashworth's research assistant at University College. I have information about her disappearance that I believe you need to hear, information that may save her life, but only if we act quickly, and only if you trust what I am about to tell you about crystal skulls, cosmic alignments, and the very real danger we all now face as December 15th draws ever nearer." Crafting. Continuing Catherine's revelations. Gothic elements. Holmes gestured Catherine Winters toward the chair nearest the fire, and I noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she removed her gloves, not from cold despite the night's chill, but from what appeared to be nervous exhaustion, held barely in check by sheer force of will. Mrs. Hudson, bless her understanding nature, had already poured fresh tea, and now pressed a cup into the young woman's hands with that maternal firmness that brooked no refusal. Catherine accepted it gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm porcelain as though drawing strength from its heat, and took several slow sips before attempting to speak further. The fire had settled into steady warmth now, casting a gentle glow that softened the harsh edges of our late-night consultation, while outside the first hints of approaching dawn began to grey the eastern sky, that subtle shift from true darkness toward the pale promise of morning. I found myself studying our unexpected visitor more carefully as she gathered her composure. Despite her dishevelled appearance and obvious distress, she carried herself with scholarly bearing, and I noticed ink stains upon her right index finger, the mark of one who writes extensively by hand. Her eyes, though shadowed with fatigue, missed nothing, taking in the crystal skull upon our mantelpiece, the scattered research materials on our table, the expedition photographs still arranged in their careful pattern. "Dr. Ashworth spoke of you, Mr. Holmes," Catherine began, her voice steadier now that warmth and tea had begun their restorative work. She admired your approach to impossible problems, your ability to see patterns others missed. When she realized the danger she faced, she told me that if anything happened, I should bring certain information to you, rather than to the police or university authorities. She said you would understand what others would dismiss as academic fantasy or worse. Holmes had settled into his chair, his fingertips pressed together in that cathedral arch of concentration, his grey eyes fixed upon our visitor with that peculiar intensity that could make people feel simultaneously examined and protected. "Please proceed, Miss Winters. You have travelled through the night to reach us, suggesting urgency that overcomes propriety's usual constraints. Tell us what Dr. Ashworth wished us to know." Catherine set down her teacup and reached into the inner pocket of her coat, withdrawing a small leather-bound notebook that she handled with obvious reverence. "This is Dr. Ashworth's personal journal, separate from her official research notes. She entrusted it to me 3 weeks ago, the day before she disappeared. She said that if she did not return within a fortnight, I was to read it and bring it to you. I waited the full 2 weeks, hoping desperately she would reappear, when she did not. Her voice caught slightly, emotion breaking through professional composure. When she did not, I read it yesterday, and what I found terrified me enough to come here immediately, despite the hour. She opened the journal to a page marked with a ribbon, and I could see Dr. Ashworth's handwriting, smaller and more cramped than in her official notes, as though she had been recording thoughts meant only for her own eyes, or for those she trusted absolutely. Catherine read aloud, her voice taking on the cadence of another's words. I have translated the shadow glyphs from the temple chamber, and what they reveal confirms my worst fears and greatest hopes simultaneously. The skulls are not merely ceremonial, or even simply repositories of astronomical data. They are keys, quite literally, designed to unlock a chamber built by Maya astronomer priests at a location the glyphs encode through celestial coordinates. This chamber, if the translations are accurate, contains records of observations spanning millennia, knowledge of cosmic cycles that could revolutionize our understanding of astronomy, physics, perhaps even the fundamental nature of reality itself. Holmes leaned forward slightly, his attention absolutely focused. Catherine continued reading. But the Brotherhood knows of this chamber as well. They have protected its location for generations, believing the knowledge it contains is too dangerous for modern civilization, that we lack the wisdom to use such understanding properly. They may be right. The Maya who built this repository understood that knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing, that power without proper context can destroy rather than enlighten. Yet, I cannot in good conscience allow such discoveries to remain hidden, to be guarded by self-appointed keepers who answer to no scientific authority. I must reach the chamber before the conjunction, must document what lies within using proper scholarly methods. If I fail, if the Brotherhood prevents me, then at least this journal will provide others the means to continue my work. The young woman's voice had grown quieter as she read, and now she looked up at us, her eyes bright with unshed tears and determination in equal measure. The journal contains the translated coordinates, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Ashworth deciphered the location where the skulls must be reunited. It is not in Guatemala, not in Central America at all. The chamber is here, in Britain, at a site the Maya somehow knew about, or perhaps even visited in their voyages of exploration. She has gone there, I am certain, hoping to unlock its secrets before December 15th. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The implications of what Catherine suggested were staggering. Maya explorers reaching Britain, a hidden chamber constructed on British soil containing astronomical knowledge that predated European civilization. It seemed fantastic, impossible. Yet the earnestness in our visitor's voice and the weight of evidence we had already accumulated suggested we could dismiss nothing as too improbable. Holmes rose and moved to the window, where the growing dawnlight now painted the eastern sky in shades of pearl and rose, London beginning its transformation from sleeping city to waking metropolis. A milk cart rattled past below, its driver whistling tunelessly, utterly unaware that in the room above him mysteries were being unravelled that might rewrite understanding of history and science alike. The crystal skull on our mantelpiece seemed to glow faintly in the changing light, as though responding to the approaching sunrise, though surely that was merely the play of dawn upon its polished facets. "Where?" Holmes asked simply, turning back to face Catherine. Where in Britain does the journal indicate this chamber lies? Glastonbury, she answered, and the word fell into our sitting room with the weight of revelation. Specifically, Glastonbury Tor, the hill that rises above the Somerset levels. According to Dr. Ashworth's translations, the Maya called it the Island of Glass, believing it to be a place where the veil between earth and stars grew thin during certain celestial alignments. They recognized it as sacred to the people who already lived there, and rather than impose their own structures, they created a hidden chamber deep within the Tor itself, accessible only to those who possess the twin keys, the crystal skulls, and the knowledge of when the cosmic door would open. The fire crackled suddenly, a log shifting position, and I found myself starting at the sound despite its mundane cause. Glastonbury Tor, with its ancient tower crowning the summit, its legends of Arthur and Avalon, its associations with ley lines and prehistoric monuments. If one were to choose a location in Britain for ancient mysteries and cosmic significance, few would be more appropriate. Yet the notion of pre-Columbian Maya priests knowing of and visiting this site challenged everything conventional history taught about contact between civilizations. The journal contains more specific information, Holmes pressed, his mind clearly already racing through logistics and implications. Directions for accessing this chamber, requirements for the unlocking process. Catherine nodded, turning pages in the journal to show Holmes directly. I rose and moved to look over his shoulder, seeing maps and diagrams, astronomical calculations, and what appeared to be ritual instructions, all rendered in Dr. Ashworth's meticulous hand. The detail was extraordinary, suggesting she had spent weeks, or perhaps months, working on these translations, cross-referencing Maya codices with astronomical tables, matching ancient observations to modern coordinates. She indicates the chamber entrance is concealed within the Tor's natural cave system, Catherine explained, pointing to a particular diagram. But it can only be opened when both skulls are present, positioned at specific angles relative to the December 15th conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. The alignment window is quite narrow, perhaps only an hour or two when the planets reach their precise configuration in the pre-dawn sky. Miss the timing, and the chamber remains sealed for another 1,000 years, until the same celestial conditions repeat. Holmes absorbed this information with that remarkable capacity he possessed for rapid assimilation and integration of complex data. And the Brotherhood, they seek to prevent this opening, to maintain the chamber's secrets in perpetual protection. I believe so, though Dr. Ashworth was uncertain of their ultimate motivation. They claim to protect dangerous knowledge, but she wondered if they themselves fully understood what the chamber contains, or if they operate on ancient mandate without clear comprehension of its original purpose. She believed dialogue might be possible, that scholarly presentation of evidence and peaceful intent could persuade them to allow supervised investigation rather than indefinite concealment. I thought of the message we had received earlier that evening, its threats veiled in formal language, and doubted the Brotherhood would prove amenable to academic negotiation. They had demonstrated resources and determination that suggested generations of dedicated purpose, unlikely to be swayed by appeals to scientific progress or scholarly collaboration. Yet Catherine's hope seemed genuine, as did her conviction that Dr. Ashworth would have sought peaceful resolution if possible. The mantel clock chimed 4 times, marking the hour with delicate precision, and I realized We had been awake for nearly 24 hours, though adrenaline and the extraordinary nature of our investigation had thus far held exhaustion at bay. Catherine looked as though she might collapse at any moment, the strain of her journey and revelations finally catching up with her youthful resilience. "Miss Winters," I said gently, "you must rest. Mrs. Hudson can prepare a room for you, and you should sleep before we continue this discussion. You have travelled far and shared crucial information. Your body requires recovery time." She shook her head with stubborn determination. "I cannot rest while Dr. Ashworth remains in danger. Every hour we delay increases the risk to her. If the Brotherhood has discovered she went to Glastonbury, they may have intercepted her already. We must go there immediately, must attempt to find her before the conjunction, before whatever they plan to prevent her investigation becomes irreversible." Holmes regarded her thoughtfully, and I could see him weighing various factors, calculating risks and probabilities with that chess master's mind. "Your loyalty to Dr. Ashworth does you credit, Miss Winters. However, rushing to Glastonbury without proper preparation would serve neither her interests nor our investigation. If the Brotherhood monitors the tour as they monitor this residence, our arrival would alert them immediately. Better we plan carefully, gather what resources and information we can access here in London, and approach Glastonbury with strategy rather than haste." The wisdom in his words was evident, though I could see Catherine struggling between logic and emotion, between the desire for immediate action and the recognition that Holmes spoke truth. Finally, she nodded slowly, the fight draining from her posture as fatigue claimed its due. Mrs. Hudson, who possessed an almost supernatural awareness of when her assistance was needed, appeared at precisely that moment to guide Catherine to a guest room, supporting the young woman's flagging steps with maternal efficiency. As their footsteps faded up the stairs, Holmes turned to me with an expression that mingled excitement and concern in equal measure. "Watson," he said quietly, "we stand at the threshold of something quite extraordinary. A hidden chamber that may rewrite history. A missing scholar who may have discovered truths that challenge our understanding of ancient civilizations. And a secret society that will stop at nothing to prevent these revelations. Tomorrow, we must begin preparations for a journey to Somerset, but tonight, what remains of it, we should attempt some rest. I suspect the coming days will test us in ways we cannot yet fully anticipate." I nodded agreement, though my mind raced too quickly for sleep to seem remotely possible. The crystal skull glowed softly in the early dawn light, now streaming through our windows, and I found myself wondering what secrets it held, locked within its crystalline structure. What messages it might share when reunited with its twin beneath Glastonbury's ancient hill. What doors might open, not just in stone chambers, but in human understanding, when December 15th's cosmic alignment arrived with its patient, inevitable certainty. Recognized Ukrainian affirmation, prepared narrative continuation. Sleep, when it finally came, was brief and populated with strange dreams of crystal labyrinths and star-filled chambers. Visions that dissolved like morning mist the moment consciousness returned. I woke to find pale November sunlight filtering through my bedroom curtains, the quality of light suggesting mid-morning rather than the early dawn I had expected. For a moment, disorientation clouded my thoughts. Then, memory flooded back with all the weight and wonder of the previous night's revelations. I dressed quickly, the familiar routine of collar and cuffs providing anchoring normality against the extraordinary nature of our current investigation, and descended to find Holmes already in animated conversation with Catherine Winters. Both of them bent over a large Ordnance Survey map spread across our dining table. The young woman appeared remarkably restored, after even a few hours of rest, her face freshly washed, her hair properly arranged, though she wore the same travelling clothes from the previous night. Mrs. Hudson, ever resourceful, had clearly provided what assistance she could with toilet articles, and perhaps a change of linen. The small domestic kindnesses that made our Baker Street residence feel less like bachelor quarters and more like actual home. The smell of fresh coffee filled the sitting room, mingling with pipe tobacco and the faint scent of old paper from the maps and documents now covering every available surface. "Ah, Watson." Holmes greeted me without looking up from his examination of the map. Perfect timing. Miss Winters has been providing additional details about the Glastonbury region. It seems Dr. Ashworth had conducted preliminary investigations of the Torres cave system last summer, well before the Guatemala expedition. She was already searching for this chamber, based on her translations of earlier Maya codices. The crystal skull merely confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. Catherine traced a route on the map with her finger, her touch gentle against the aged paper. She spent 2 weeks in Glastonbury in July, staying at a small inn near the Abbey ruins. She hired a local guide familiar with the Torres caves and tunnels, a man named Thomas Blackthorne, who has lived in the area his entire life. Dr. Ashworth believed his family had been guardians of local folklore for generations, keepers of stories that might preserve genuine historical memory beneath layers of legend and myth. I poured myself coffee and leaned over the map to study the topography. Glastonbury Tor rose prominently from the surrounding flatlands, a distinctive landmark visible for miles across the Somerset levels. The map showed various footpaths ascending to the summit, where the Tower of St. Michael stood, but it also indicated the presence of natural caves and what were labelled as ancient workings on the Tor's slopes. Whether these represented medieval quarrying, prehistoric mining, or something else entirely, the map did not specify. "This Thomas Blackthorne?" I asked, settling into my chair with my coffee. "Is he trustworthy? If we are to approach the Tor seeking hidden chambers and pre-Columbian secrets, we shall need local assistance from someone discreet and reliable." Dr. Ashworth trusted him implicitly, Catherine replied. She said he possessed knowledge passed down through his family that suggested contact between Somerset people and foreign visitors in what he called the old times, before Rome, before the Saxons. He spoke of star watchers who came from across the Western Ocean, bearing gifts of crystal and knowledge of the sky's movements. The academic establishment would dismiss such claims as local fantasy, but Dr. Ashworth believed folk memory can preserve truth that official history overlooks or deliberately obscures. A sharp knock at our door interrupted further discussion, and Mrs. Hudson appeared carrying a telegram on her silver tray, her expression suggesting she found our recent volume of urgent communications somewhat taxing. Holmes took the message, and I watched his face carefully as he read, noting the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated news of significance. "From Professor Blackwood," he announced, passing me the telegram. "Dr. Constantine visited the museum again this morning, this time accompanied by 2 associates. They demanded access to the expedition documentation, claiming legal authority through some obscure international treaty regarding cultural heritage. The professor refused, and has now locked all relevant materials in the museum's secure vault. He asks whether we require any items for our continued investigation, as he fears future access may become complicated. I read the telegram myself, noting the professor's barely concealed anxiety in the abbreviated phrasing. The Brotherhood grows bolder. They must be feeling pressure from the approaching conjunction date. If they believe we possess information that might lead us to the chamber, they may escalate beyond polite demands. Holmes had moved to the window, his restless energy evident in the taut line of his shoulders as he gazed down at Baker Street's late morning activity. Indeed, which is why we must depart for Glastonbury today, rather than delay further. Watson, can you be ready to travel within 2 hours? We shall take the afternoon train from Paddington, arriving in Somerset by early evening. Miss Winters, I presume you intend to accompany us? Absolutely, Catherine replied with firm determination. Dr. Ashworth is my mentor and friend. I will not abandon her to whatever danger she faces. The following hours passed in a flurry of preparation. I packed my travelling bag with practical necessities, including my service revolver and additional ammunition, reasoning that if the Brotherhood proved willing to escalate, we should not face them unarmed. Holmes assembled a collection of items that seemed eclectic to the point of randomness. Surveying equipment, a powerful electric torch, photographic supplies, rope and climbing gear, and various scientific instruments whose purposes I could only guess. The crystal skull was carefully wrapped in velvet cloth and placed in a specially constructed wooden case that Holmes locked with a small brass key. Mrs. Hudson, bless her, prepared a basket of provisions for the journey, shaking her head at the madness of gentlemen and ladies rushing off to Somerset on mysterious errands, but ensuring we would not go hungry in the process. As she handed Holmes the basket, I saw her eyes linger on his face with concern that transcended her usual professional distance. "You will be careful, Mr. Holmes," she said, and it was statement rather than question, carrying weight of years of watching him pursue dangerous investigations. Whatever this business involves, it has the feel of something beyond ordinary cases. "We shall exercise all due caution, Mrs. Hudson," Holmes assured her with genuine warmth. "And we have Watson's steadying influence and military training should circumstances require direct action. We shall return within a week at most, bearing, I hope, solutions to mysteries both ancient and immediate." "We must assume the Brotherhood knows of Glastonbury's significance," Holmes reasoned, his voice low enough that only Catherine and I could hear over the cab's rattling progress. "They may already have agents in the area, watching the tour, monitoring anyone who shows unusual interest in its caves or legends. Therefore, we arrive as tourists, drawn by Glastonbury's established attractions, the Abbey ruins, the Holy Thorn, the conventional pilgrimage routes. We engage this Thomas Blackthorne as a general guide for the region's antiquities, and only once we have established his continued reliability do we reveal our true purpose." The train, when we boarded it, proved reasonably comfortable, a first-class carriage that Holmes had arranged through telegram ahead of our arrival. As London gave way to countryside, the landscape transforming from urban density to rural expanse, I found myself contemplating the strange journey we had undertaken. Less than 48 hours ago, we had been sitting peacefully in Baker Street, Holmes bemoaning the lack of interesting cases. Now, we raced towards Somerset, in pursuit of a vanished scholar carrying a pre-Columbian crystal skull, seeking a hidden chamber that might rewrite history, while a mysterious brotherhood watched our movements with intentions we could only partially discern. Catherine sat across from us, her attention fixed on the passing landscape with an intensity that suggested she saw beyond mere fields and villages to whatever awaited us at journey's end. She had been quiet since boarding, the initial energy that had carried her through the morning now giving way to contemplative anxiety about what we might find in Glastonbury. I wanted to offer reassurance, but could not, in honesty, promise that Dr. Ashworth remained safe, or that our investigation would conclude successfully. Somewhere ahead lay Glastonbury, with its tor rising above marshlands that had once been inland sea, its tower standing sentinel over mysteries both Christian and pre-Christian, Roman and pre-Roman, perhaps even bearing witness to visitors from across oceans in times when such voyages were thought impossible by conventional history. And somewhere within or beneath that ancient hill, if Catherine's information proved accurate, a chamber waited that had not been opened in 1,000 years, designed to reveal its secrets only when twin crystal keys unlocked it under the precise celestial conditions of a rare planetary conjunction. The train's rhythm was hypnotic, wheels clicking over rail joints in endless repetition, and I felt myself drifting despite the extraordinary circumstances of our journey. Across from me, Catherine too had succumbed to exhaustion's delayed claim, her head tilted against the window, her breathing slow and steady with sleep. Only Holmes remained fully alert, his grey eyes now open and fixed upon the crystal skull's case resting on the seat beside him, as though through sheer force of observation he might compel it to reveal what knowledge it held, locked within its flawless, silent depths. The answers, I suspected, lay waiting in the darkness beneath an ancient hill, guarded by stone and secret, by time and tradition, by a brotherhood that had maintained its vigil across centuries. Whether we would prove worthy of those answers, whether we possessed the wisdom to use such knowledge properly, remained to be seen. But the train carried us forward regardless, patient and inexorable as the planets themselves, toward whatever revelations or dangers December's approaching conjunction might bring. Crafting its opening and narrative continuation, Glastonbury revealed itself gradually through the train window as dusk settled over Somerset, the tor rising from the Serng from the surrounding flatlands, like a sleeping giant's shoulder thrust above the earth, its silhouette crowned by the Tower of St. Michael that caught the last amber rays of failing sunlight. The landscape here possessed a quality unlike anything in London's vicinity, a sense of vast openness where sky met earth along horizons unbroken by human construction, where water and land seemed to negotiate their boundaries with seasonal impermanence. The marshes that spread across the levels reflected the twilight in countless pools and channels, creating a world of mirrors that doubled the sky's fading colours, pearl and rose and deepening violet, until one could not say with certainty where heaven ended and earth began. The train's whistle sounded, a long, mournful note that seemed to carry across those flat expanses with peculiar clarity, and I felt Catherine stir from her sleep, blinking away confusion before memory returned, and she straightened in her seat, turning immediately towards the window. Her sharp intake of breath told me she too felt the impact of the tor's presence, that sense of ancientness and purpose that radiated from its distinctive shape even from this distance. Holmes remained motionless, but I noticed his eyes had fixed upon the same view, his expression holding that focused intensity that indicated his mind was already at work, already assessing approaches and possibilities, calculating what the landscape itself might reveal about the mysteries it harboured. The station at Glastonbury proved modest, a simple platform with a small waiting room where a porter dozed beside a trolley stacked with mail sacks and parcels. Our arrival seemed to constitute the day's primary excitement, and the elderly station master greeted us with the careful courtesy of one unaccustomed to first-class passengers, but determined to maintain proper standards regardless. Holmes arranged for our luggage to be delivered to the George and Pilgrim's Hotel, an establishment the station master assured us was the finest accommodation Glastonbury offered, with history stretching back to medieval times, and comfort sufficient for the most discriminating travellers. We walked through the town in the gathering darkness, our footsteps echoing on cobblestones that had known centuries of pilgrims and seekers, merchants and monks, all drawn to this place by faith or commerce or simple human curiosity about lands beyond their familiar horizons. Gas lamps were being lit as we passed, their warm glow pushing back the twilight and casting dancing shadows that made the ancient buildings seem to shift and breathe with their own slow rhythm. The abbey ruins loomed to our right, dark shapes against the darkening sky, arches and walls that had once enclosed one of England's greatest monasteries, now standing open to wind and weather, testament to time's patient dismantling of even the mightiest human constructions. The George and Pilgrim's Hotel stood solid and welcoming, its Tudor facade speaking of ages when this building had served travellers seeking the abbey's holy wells and sacred relics. Inside, the atmosphere wrapped around us like a comfortable blanket, all dark wood panelling and worn flagstones, the scent of beeswax polish and wood smoke, the soft glow of oil lamps supplementing the newer gas fixtures. The proprietor, a woman of middle years with sharp eyes and capable hands, received us with professional efficiency, showing no surprise at our late arrival or our request for 3 rooms with views toward the Tor. Once we had refreshed ourselves and reassembled in the hotel's small dining room, Holmes wasted no time in beginning his inquiries. Our meal, simple but excellently prepared Somerset fare, provided natural opportunity for conversation with the proprietor, who proved more than willing to discuss the area's attractions and peculiarities. Yes, she confirmed, Thomas Blackthorne was well known in the town, a man of local family who earned his living as a guide and occasional labourer, known for his knowledge of the Tor's paths and legends. No, she had not seen Dr. Ashworth recently, though she remembered the lady from her visit in July, a quiet scholar who had spent her days walking the Tor and her evenings making notes by candlelight. Odd, though, the proprietor added as she cleared our soup bowls, her voice dropping to that confidential tone people adopt when sharing observations they consider significant. There have been strangers about these past weeks, foreign gentlemen, well-dressed, but asking peculiar questions about the Tor's caves and old legends. Mr. Blackthorne turned them away, I heard, said he guides only those with proper respect for the old places. But they didn't leave Glastonbury. I've seen them watching from the market square, always looking toward the Tor, as though waiting for something. Holmes thanked her for this information with such warmth that she positively glowed, and I reflected, not for the first time, on his remarkable ability to extract intelligence through genuine appreciation rather than mere manipulation. After she had departed to fetch our main course, Catherine leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Brotherhood is here already. They must know Dr. Ashworth came to Glastonbury, if they have been watching for weeks. Then they are patient, disciplined, and confident." Holmes finished her thought. "They make no attempt at concealment, suggesting they believe the chamber's protection sufficient that they need not fear premature access. Or, perhaps, they hope to observe who else comes seeking it, to identify all interested parties before the conjunction forces decisive action." The meal continued with discussion of our approach, Holmes outlining a plan that balanced caution with the pressing need to locate Dr. Ashworth before time ran too short. In the morning, we would engage Thomas Blackthorne openly as a guide, claiming interest in the tour's historical and archaeological features. We would assess his character and knowledge before revealing our true purpose. Meanwhile, Holmes suggested that Catherine might make discreet inquiries among the townspeople, woman to woman, about any sightings of Dr. Ashworth or unusual activities around the tor. A sudden crash from the kitchen made us all start, followed by the proprietor's voice, raised in dismay over what sounded like broken crockery. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet dining room, a sharp intrusion that left my heart racing disproportionately to the actual disturbance. I realized how tightly wound we had all become, how the accumulated tension of our investigation had left us primed to interpret even innocent accidents as potential threats. Holmes noticed my reaction and offered a slight smile of understanding. "We are all feeling the weight of this mystery, Watson. Perhaps after dinner, a walk to settle our nerves? The night air might provide clarity, and I confess curiosity about the tour by moonlight, assuming the clouds permit such observation." The clouds did indeed part as we stepped out into the November night, revealing a moon near full that painted the world in shades of silver and shadow. The tor rose before us, perhaps a mile distant, its bulk dark against the star-strewn sky, the tower atop it catching moonlight, and seeming almost to glow with pale luminescence. We walked slowly along the road leading out of town, our breath misting in the cold air, frost already beginning to silver the grass in fields on either side. "In 2 weeks," Catherine said softly, her eyes fixed on the tor's summit. "Jupiter and Saturn will align in that very sky, visible just before dawn." Dr. Ashworth showed me the calculations, the precise moment when their conjunction reaches the configuration that occurred 1,000 years ago. She believed that at that moment, with both skulls present at the correct location within the tor, some mechanism would activate, some door would open that has remained sealed across all the centuries between. I found myself trying to imagine what such a moment might be like, standing in a hidden chamber deep within that ancient hill, holding crystal artifacts created by a civilization that had flourished and fallen on a continent across vast oceans, waiting for planets to achieve an alignment that cared nothing for human hopes or fears, but simply followed the eternal mathematics of orbital mechanics. The image was both thrilling and somehow humbling, a reminder that we were participants in cycles far larger and more enduring than individual lives or even entire civilizations. We had walked perhaps half the distance to the tor when Holmes stopped abruptly, his hand raised for silence. I listened carefully and heard what had caught his attention. Voices, low and speaking in what sounded like a language I did not recognize, coming from somewhere off the road to our left. Moonlight illuminated a small copse of trees, perhaps 50 yards distant, and I could make out flickering light among the branches. The warm glow of a fire or lanterns, hidden from the road, but visible from our angle. Holmes gestured for us to move quietly back the way we had come, and we retreated a dozen paces before he spoke, his voice barely audible. The Brotherhood, unless I am much mistaken, they maintain a watch post with clear view of the Tor's approaches. We should return to the hotel before we are noticed. We have learned what we needed to know. They are organized, they are vigilant, and they are committed to whatever purpose brings them here. The walk back to Glastonbury felt longer than our outward journey, each of us absorbed in private thoughts about what the coming days might bring. The hotel welcomed us with its warm lights and solid walls, a refuge from the cold night and the unseen watchers who kept their mysterious vigil in the darkness beyond the town's edges. As we climbed the stairs to our respective rooms, Catherine paused, her hand on the railing, her face illuminated by the candle she carried. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I want to thank you for coming here, for taking Dr. Ashworth's disappearance seriously, when others might have dismissed it as mere academic eccentricity. Whatever happens in the coming days, whatever we find or fail to find, please know that your willingness to believe, to investigate, to seek truth, even when it challenges conventional understanding, it means more than I can properly express." Her words touched me deeply, and I saw in Holmes's face a softening of his usual analytical distance, a moment of genuine human connection that he so often kept carefully controlled. "Miss Winters," he replied gently, "the pursuit of truth, wherever it may lead, is perhaps the most noble calling to which human minds can aspire. Your mentor understood this, and in her honour, we shall see this mystery through to whatever end it reaches. Now rest. Tomorrow we begin the final phase of our investigation, and we shall need all our faculties sharp and ready." In my room, I stood at the window, looking out toward the Tor, just visible as a dark mass against the slightly lighter sky. Somewhere within that hill, a chamber waited that had not been entered in a millennium. Somewhere in Glastonbury, or perhaps already hidden within the Tor's tunnels, Dr. Margaret Ashworth pursued knowledge that might illuminate or endanger, reveal or conceal, depending on who controlled it, and to what purposes they directed its power. And surrounding all of it, watching with patient intensity, the Brotherhood maintained their ancient vigil, guardians of secrets they believed too dangerous for the modern world to possess. Sleep, when I finally sought it, came slowly and brought dreams of crystal chambers and star-filled skies, of voices speaking in unknown tongues and doors opening onto vistas of understanding that human minds struggled to comprehend. Tomorrow would bring us closer to answers, closer to Dr. Ashworth, closer to the conjunction that approached with the inexorable certainty of celestial mechanics, counting down the days until December 15th arrived. And whatever the twin skulls were designed to unlock would finally, after 1,000 patient years, reveal itself to those who had the courage or foolishness to seek its long-hidden truths.